It was a typical Monday morning at Riverview High School. The halls were filled with the usual noise of students chatting, lockers slamming, and the hum of the overhead lights. Mr. Carter, a seasoned history teacher in his late 40s, stood in front of his classroom, preparing his lesson for the day. He glanced at the clock, noting that it was just about time for the bell to ring. As usual, he was ready to start the day with his students, eager to impart knowledge about the past. But something was off. There was a subtle tension in the air, though no one could quite put their finger on it. The students filed into the classroom, some of them groggy, others energized from their weekend, but all of them oblivious to the dark events unfolding just beyond their school's walls. As the bell rang, Mr. Carter started his lecture on the fall of ancient civilizations, but his mind kept wandering back to the strange news he had caught in bits and pieces over the weekend, reports of violent outbreaks across the city. People turning savage. Attacks spreading like wildfire. His students were mostly inattentive, as usual, but one or two of them were scrolling through their phones, likely looking up the same stories he had heard. Mr. Carter paused mid-sentence, watching a few of the students raise their heads, eyes wide with curiosity. "Mr. Carter, did you hear? There's something happening downtown. People are attacking each other." Sarah, a quiet but perceptive girl in the front row, spoke up. "Yeah, it's on the news," chimed in James, the class clown. "They're saying some kind of virus is spreading, making people lose their minds. It's all over the internet." Mr. Carter hesitated. The classroom fell silent. Something in the tone of their voices unsettled him. It wasn't just another rumor, there was a sense of panic growing among the students, even if they didn't fully understand what was happening. "We'll talk about it later," he said, trying to maintain some semblance of control. "Let's focus on the lesson. The past is the best teacher we have for understanding the present." But his words fell flat. The students were more interested in their phones than history. The screen glowed in their hands, casting an eerie light across their faces. Mr. Carter continued to speak, but his attention had shifted. The unease gnawed at him, growing stronger by the second. Something didn't feel right. Outside the classroom windows, the sky was an unusual shade of gray, almost as if a storm was brewing. A loud crash echoed from somewhere down the hallway, followed by a string of frantic shouts. Mr. Carter's heart raced as he instinctively stood up, walking to the door to peer outside. The hallway was chaotic, students were running in every direction, some of them screaming, others stumbling with their hands over their ears, as though they were trying to block out the horrific noise. Without thinking, Mr. Carter threw open the door, stepping into the hallway. The scene before him was a nightmare. One student, his face smeared with blood, lunged at another, knocking him to the ground. The victim's scream was cut short as he was dragged beneath the hallway lights, his body jerking violently. In an instant, Mr. Carter recognized what was happening. The students weren't fighting, no, they were attacking each other in the most grotesque way. Their eyes were wide and wild, their movements erratic, as though their very humanity had been ripped from them. A scream echoed down the corridor, and it was then that the gravity of the situation hit him. He had to act. He couldn't just stand there. "Everyone, back into the classroom, now!" Mr. Carter shouted, his voice firm, commanding. His students, still half in shock, slowly began to retreat. One of the girls near the back of the room, crying uncontrollably, clung to her friend. "What's going on, Mr. Carter? What are they doing?" He had no answer for her. No one did. As the last student scrambled into the safety of the classroom, Mr. Carter slammed the door shut, locking it behind him. The frantic noise outside only grew louder. The teacher's mind raced. He had never imagined anything like this. Could this really be happening? Was this the virus everyone had been talking about? The classroom was tense, every student glued to the window, peeking through the blinds as the horrifying chaos unfolded. The once ordinary school had become a war zone. The sound of banging against the walls, screeches, and the unmistakable growl of something monstrous filled the air. "We need to stay calm," Mr. Carter said, trying to steady his breath. "We're safe in here for now, but we don't know how long that'll last. The students looked to him, their only source of stability in this nightmare. Mr. Carter's mind raced. What were the chances of getting out? Was there anywhere safe left in the city? Would anyone survive? He didn't know, but one thing was clear: the teacher's last lesson was not going to be about history. It was going to be about survival. And that lesson had just begun. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. Inside the classroom, the tension was thick. Students whispered nervously, exchanging worried glances, unsure of what to do next. Mr. Carter stood by the door, his back pressed against the cold, steel frame as he tried to gather his thoughts. The sounds of chaos outside were growing louder, more frantic. What had begun as distant, muffled screams were now unrecognizable, distorted by frantic shouts and blood-curdling growls. It felt as if the walls themselves were vibrating with the energy of something horrifying just beyond their reach. "Mr. Carter, what's happening out there?" Sarah's voice was shaky, but there was an edge of determination in it too. She was a quiet girl, but now, in the face of unimaginable fear, she was taking charge. "Is this a virus? Like they said on the news?" Mr. Carter swallowed hard, but he couldn't give her a reassuring answer. There was no way to explain what they were hearing. What was happening outside the classroom felt like something out of a nightmare no one had been prepared for. It wasn't just a virus. It was something worse, something that turned people into monsters, into rabid, bloodthirsty creatures, attacking anyone they could find. "I don't know," Mr. Carter answered truthfully, his voice strained. "But it doesn't matter what we think it is. All that matters is how we survive this." There was a brief, uncomfortable silence as the weight of his words settled in. The students nodded, some more out of instinct than comprehension. They had no idea what they were really up against. Suddenly, the banging on the door jolted them all. The classroom fell silent, all eyes darting to the door where a heavy thud reverberated. It was followed by another, louder, more forceful. Mr. Carter tensed, instinctively moving toward the door, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked out the small window beside the door, trying to catch a glimpse of what was happening on the other side. For a brief moment, there was nothing. The hallway beyond was eerily still. But then, with a sickening crack, the door to the classroom rattled, as though someone, or something, was trying to break through. Mr. Carter stepped back, his pulse racing. "Stay quiet," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The students obeyed, clinging to the silence, their eyes wide with fear. Mr. Carter could see their faces reflected in the glass: fear, confusion, and disbelief. None of them could truly grasp the magnitude of the situation yet, but that was about to change. Then, the door buckled with another violent blow, this time splintering at the hinges. A shadowy figure appeared in the hallway, moving in jerky, erratic motions. Its face was a pale, lifeless mask of blood and gore, its eyes wide and vacant. Mr. Carter's stomach twisted as the realization hit him: the creature outside wasn't human anymore. It was one of the infected. A zombie. Before he could react, the door shuttered again. The creature on the other side slammed against it with an inhuman force, and this time, the door cracked open just enough for Mr. Carter to catch a glimpse of its grotesque, decaying form. In a flash, Mr. Carter acted. With adrenaline surging through his veins, he pushed the desk in front of the door, blocking it with all his strength. The students screamed as they watched him struggle, but he couldn't stop now. The pounding on the door grew louder, the creature outside pressing with relentless fury. "Move," he shouted. "Move to the back of the room, now." The students scrambled to obey, fear taking over as they rushed to the far corner of the room. Mr. Carter's mind raced as he tried to think of their next move. They couldn't stay in the classroom forever. The door wouldn't hold much longer, and if the zombies outside got in, it would be over. He looked around, searching for anything that could help. The classroom was filled with desks, bookshelves, and the standard school supplies. But none of that was useful now. They needed weapons. They needed a way out. The sound of the door snapping open broke his focus, and the first zombie tumbled into the classroom. Its mouth was open in a feral snarl, saliva dripping from its teeth as it stumbled forward, hungry for flesh. The students screamed, some of them frozen in terror, while others rushed to the back of the room. Mr. Carter's heart pounded in his chest as he grabbed a nearby chair and swung it at the creature. It collided with the zombie's head, knocking it back, but the thing was relentless. It lurched forward again, undeterred, its vacant eyes locked on Mr. Carter. The teacher had no choice but to keep fighting, to keep his students alive. "Get to the windows," he shouted as he shoved the chair aside. "Now!" But before they could make a move, a second zombie staggered into the room, followed by a third. It was as if the entire hallway outside had become a breeding ground for the undead. The students were trapped, with no way to escape. Mr. Carter's mind raced. They needed a plan, and fast. He couldn't let them fall apart. "Not now. Listen to me," he yelled. "We can survive this, but only if we stick together. We need to get out of here and find somewhere safe." A voice broke through the chaos, Sarah's voice, trembling but determined. "Where do we go? The whole school is overrun." He looked at her, the truth in his eyes. "I don't know. But we can't stay here." With that, the teacher's last lesson began in earnest. And as the undead closed in around them, survival became the only lesson that mattered. The chaos in the classroom intensified. The stench of decay hung in the air as the undead continued to claw at the entrance, each of them more frantic and relentless than the last. The students, now huddled in the back of the room, looked at Mr. Carter with wide, terrified eyes. They had seen the first zombie fall but knew there were more just outside the door, relentless and unstoppable. Mr. Carter's pulse raced as he surveyed the room. There was no time to waste. The walls seemed to close in on them, the shrieks of the undead growing louder. A few of the students were crying, while others trembled, unsure of what to do next. Panic was starting to set in, but Mr. Carter had to remain calm. He had to be their leader, their guide through this nightmare. "Listen up," Mr. Carter shouted, his voice firm. The students, though visibly shaken, turned their attention to him. "We're not safe here. That door won't hold for long, and we're not staying to find out what happens when it breaks. We need to get out of the building." "How do we get out?" Sarah asked, her voice a mix of fear and desperation. "The hallways are filled with them." "We'll figure it out," Mr. Carter said, his mind working on overdrive. His eyes darted around the room, seeking any kind of escape route. "The windows," he said, suddenly, his voice rising with urgency. "We can get out through the windows. There's a fire escape ladder on the side of the building. If we can break through the windows, we can climb out." The idea of climbing out of the window seemed like their best shot. Mr. Carter quickly walked over to the nearest window and tried to pry open the locked pane, but it wouldn't budge. He yanked harder, but the lock resisted, stubborn and unyielding. The pounding at the door grew louder, and the students watched in silent horror. "We need something to break the glass," Mr. Carter muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. He glanced around, hoping for something, anything that could help them escape. His eyes landed on the classroom's heavy fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. It was their only hope. He quickly grabbed the extinguisher and turned to face the window. With all the strength he could muster, he swung it at the glass. The first hit cracked the surface, but the glass held firm. Another strike, and this time, the glass shattered, sending jagged pieces to the floor. The sharp sound of the glass breaking echoed throughout the room, sending a wave of panic through the students. But Mr. Carter didn't hesitate. He climbed onto the windowsill, peering out at the fire escape ladder. It was only a few stories down, but the ladder might as well have been a mile away with the undead closing in behind them. They had to move, and they had to move fast. "Go!" he yelled. "Everyone, out the window, now!" One by one, the students scrambled toward the broken window. Sarah was the first to go, her hands trembling as she climbed over the sill and onto the ledge. Behind her, the others followed, some hesitant, some more determined. The fire escape ladder swayed in the wind as if mocking their desperation, but they had no choice but to trust it. Mr. Carter kept a close watch on the hallway, his senses on high alert. The undead were close, too close for comfort. He could hear them growling, the sound of their gurgling throats growing louder with every passing second. The noise outside was deafening, and he knew that time was running out. "Keep going," Mr. Carter urged, his voice desperate. "Don't stop. Get down the ladder and keep moving. We can't stay here." James, the class clown, was the next to climb through the window, his usual bravado now replaced with fear. He hesitated for a moment, looking down at the fire escape ladder below. He had never been good with heights. "Come on, man," shouted another student, Michael, pushing James gently. "We don't have time for this." With a nervous glance, James finally let go and lowered himself onto the fire escape ladder. He descended quickly, the metallic rungs creaking under his weight. The others followed, one by one, until Mr. Carter was the last to go. He took one last look into the classroom, the door now splintering under the force of the zombies' attacks. His heart pounded as he squeezed through the broken window. His fingers gripped the cold metal of the ladder, and he slowly began his descent. But as he reached the second story, the unmistakable sound of something heavy crashing against the window frame made him freeze. He glanced upward, his stomach dropping into his shoes. A zombie, its face half broken, its clothes torn and hanging off its skeletal frame, was clinging to the window ledge. It was climbing toward him. "Get down! Move!" he shouted to the last students who were still on the ledge. Panic spread through the group. Sarah was the first to reach the bottom, her feet hitting the ground with a heavy thud. Mr. Carter pushed himself faster down the ladder, his hands raw from the pressure. The creature on the window ledge let out an ear-piercing scream as it lost its grip and fell to the ground, landing with a sickening thud. Mr. Carter hit the ground seconds later, pain shooting through his legs, but he quickly recovered. "Go!" he shouted again, pointing down the alleyway. The group was now standing on the grass next to the school, gasping for breath. "Where now, Mr. Carter?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling with fear, but also a spark of hope. Mr. Carter's eyes scanned the area, trying to get his bearings. They had no idea how far the horde had spread. But they couldn't stay near the school. "We head to the woods," he said, pointing toward the tree line at the edge of the field. "It's the only chance we have." With no time to waste, they took off running, their hearts racing, their only hope for survival lying ahead, into the unknown darkness of the woods. The group sprinted toward the woods, the distant sound of crashing glass and the guttural growls of the undead growing louder behind them. The adrenaline coursing through their veins pushed them faster, but they knew it wouldn't be long before they'd be surrounded if they didn't keep moving. The trees at the edge of the field grew closer, their shadows stretching out like dark fingers, beckoning them into the unknown. Mr. Carter led the way, his mind racing with each step. He wasn't a survivalist, and he didn't know what he was doing. He wasn't equipped for this, but he had to protect his students. That was all that mattered now. Every second counted. They had no choice but to trust the woods, and if they were lucky, they might find shelter, maybe even some form of safety. As they entered the tree line, the open field behind them grew quieter, but only momentarily. It wasn't long before the first sound of the undead breaking through the school gates echoed in the distance, and Mr. Carter knew that they weren't safe yet. The creatures could still be close behind, but at least the trees offered some cover. "Keep moving, no stopping," Mr. Carter urged, his voice hoarse. "Stay close to the trees, don't let them see you." The students nodded, most of them still in shock but instinctively following his lead. They pushed deeper into the woods, their breathing loud and ragged, but every step felt like a small victory. They had made it out of the school. But as they went further into the forest, a growing sense of unease settled over the group. The forest wasn't a safe haven. It was dark, and the thick canopy of leaves blocked most of the sunlight. Branches scraped against their arms, and the ground was uneven, causing them to trip and stumble. But worse than the physical challenges was the haunting silence that had overtaken the area. There were no birds, no animals, nothing but the rustling of leaves beneath their feet. "Do you think we lost them?" Michael asked, his voice trembling, looking nervously over his shoulder as if expecting to see the undead crawling from behind the trees. "I don't know," Mr. Carter replied. "We need to keep moving, but stay quiet. We don't want to attract attention." The students kept their eyes trained ahead, but it was hard to shake the feeling that they weren't truly alone. Every snap of a twig beneath their feet, every gust of wind through the branches felt like it could be the last warning before they were swarmed. They didn't know how much time had passed since they left the school, but the sun was dipping lower in the sky. They had to find shelter, somewhere they could regroup and plan their next move. "How far do you think it is to the next town?" Sarah asked, trying to steady her breath. "Should we head there?" Mr. Carter shook his head. "We don't know what's out there. For all we know, the whole city is overrun. We need to find somewhere safe, somewhere off the beaten path." "Like what?" James asked sarcastically, though his tone was more out of fear than his usual bravado. "A secret cabin in the woods?" "It's not much, but we don't have much of a choice," Mr. Carter answered, keeping his voice calm. "We'll stick together, keep moving forward. We'll find a place to hold up for the night." They continued walking, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves and dirt. The woods felt like they were closing in on them, the trees standing like silent sentinels, watching them with an oppressive stillness. It felt wrong, as though something unseen was lurking just out of sight, waiting to pounce. Then, just as the tension reached its peak, a rustling sound broke the silence. It came from behind them, just off to the left, close enough that they could hear the leaves crunching underfoot. The group froze. Mr. Carter's heart slammed against his chest as he held up a hand. "Shoo," he whispered urgently. "Everyone, stop. Don't move." The students looked at each other, fear written on their faces. But no one made a sound. The rustling continued, closer now, as though something, or someone, was moving in the shadows. Was it a zombie? A wild animal? Or was it something else entirely? The group stood motionless, their breath held, as the rustling grew louder. Mr. Carter's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. He slowly reached for the heavy stick he had picked up earlier, his fingers tightening around it, preparing himself for whatever was out there. Then, without warning, the figure emerged from the underbrush, a person. A man, disheveled and covered in dirt, stumbled into their line of sight. His eyes were wide with fear, his clothes torn, and he looked like he hadn't seen another human being in days. "Don't shoot," the man called out in a hoarse voice, holding his hands up in a gesture of peace. "Please. I'm not one of them." The students flinched, and Mr. Carter stepped forward, raising his stick slightly but not taking any aggressive action. "Who are you?" he demanded, trying to assess the man's intentions. "My name's Jack," the man replied, his voice shaky but urgent. "I've been hiding out in these woods for days. I saw what happened at the school. The whole city's gone mad. I've been trying to survive." Mr. Carter's grip tightened on the stick as he assessed Jack's story. There was something about him that seemed genuine, but they couldn't take chances. "What do you want?" Mr. Carter asked, his voice steady but cautious. I need help," Jack replied, his eyes darting nervously over their shoulders. "The undead, they're everywhere. They're hunting us down. Please, let me come with you. I know these woods. I can show you a safe place. I know where to go." Mr. Carter exchanged a glance with Sarah, then with the rest of the group. This was a risk, but they had little choice. They were out in the woods, with no clear direction, and Jack's knowledge might be their best chance of survival. "All right," Mr. Carter said, taking a deep breath. "You can come with us. But stay in the back, and no sudden moves. We can't trust anyone right now." Jack nodded quickly, his expression grateful but fearful. "Thank you," he whispered. "You won't regret this." And with that, the group moved deeper into the woods, now joined by a stranger, one more uncertain piece in the puzzle of survival. They could only hope Jack knew the way to safety. The group pressed on, the darkness of the forest swallowing them as they moved deeper into the trees. Jack led the way now, his knowledge of the woods guiding them through thick underbrush and around jagged rocks. Mr. Carter stayed near the back, watching the others closely, particularly Sarah and James, who were still visibly shaken from the events back at the school. Despite their fear, they knew they had no choice but to keep going. As they moved, the sounds of the undead grew more distant, but the eerie silence of the forest was unsettling in its own way. No birds chirped, no squirrels scurried through the leaves. It was as though the entire forest had been frozen in time, holding its breath as they passed. Mr. Carter's heart pounded in his chest, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. But Jack seemed to know where he was going, and that gave him some hope. Jack led them to a clearing after what felt like hours of trekking through the dense woods. In the center of the clearing stood an old, weather-beaten cabin, its windows boarded up, and the chimney sending a thin wisp of smoke into the air. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. For now, that was enough. "Here it is," Jack said, his voice hoarse with relief. "It's not much, but it's safe. I've been hiding here for days. The zombies haven't found it yet." The group approached cautiously, but Jack's calm demeanor seemed to reassure them, even if only slightly. Mr. Carter eyed the cabin warily. It looked abandoned, but it could still be hiding dangers they weren't prepared for. They needed rest, but they also needed to stay vigilant. "Let's check it out first," Mr. Carter said, glancing around at the others. "No one goes in until we're sure it's clear." Jack nodded, understanding the need for caution. He stepped forward and slowly opened the door, the hinges creaking loudly. The group flinched, but Jack quickly stepped inside, disappearing into the darkness of the cabin. "Stay here," Mr. Carter ordered, keeping the group at the edge of the clearing. He motioned for Sarah to stay close, while he and Michael followed Jack inside, their eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. The last thing they needed was to find the cabin already occupied by zombies or anything worse. The air inside the cabin was musty and stale. The floorboards creaked underfoot as they moved through the small living space. A single wood stove sat in the corner, its metal surface cold and unwelcoming. The furniture was sparse, old chairs and a rickety table, but it was enough to tell them that someone had once lived here, and now it had been abandoned. "Clear," Jack said from the back of the room. "It's empty. I've been coming in and out for a while now, and no one's found it." Mr. Carter nodded, his hands still gripping the stick tightly. "All right. We'll take a look around, then we rest. But we stay alert. We have no idea how many of those things are out there." The group slowly filed into the cabin, the door creaking shut behind them. The sense of relief was palpable, but Mr. Carter knew better than to let his guard down. They had survived the school and the woods, but that didn't mean they were out of danger yet. The world had changed, and they couldn't afford to trust anything, not even a place that seemed like it could be a sanctuary. "Is there food here?" Michael asked, his voice low as he inspected a dusty cabinet. Jack nodded. "I've got some cans, some dried stuff. Not much, but enough for a few days. You can eat while I figure out our next move." "Next move?" Sarah asked, her face pale but determined. "What do we do now? We can't just stay here forever." Mr. Carter took a deep breath. The question had been hanging in the air ever since they left the school. He didn't know what the right answer was. They could keep moving, but that would put them back out in the open, vulnerable to the zombies. They could try to find a larger group of survivors, but who knew if any such group existed anymore? The world as they knew it was gone. "We survive," he said finally. "We take it day by day. Right now, we stay here, regroup, and figure out what our options are. But we don't stay idle. We'll need to make plans. We can't rely on this place forever." As the group settled in, the cabin slowly became their temporary home, though none of them dared to relax completely. The fire from the wood stove crackled quietly in the corner, casting long shadows across the room. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, there was an uneasy peace. Jack began to prepare some of the food he had stashed away, heating up cans of beans and soup over the stove. It wasn't much, but it would keep them going for a while. The students ate in silence, their minds still processing everything that had happened. No one could find words for the horrors they had witnessed. They had survived, but at what cost? "Mr. Carter," Sarah said after a long pause. "Do you think we'll ever get back to normal? I mean, do you think there's any hope left for the world?" Mr. Carter looked at her, his face grim. The question hung in the air, heavy and full of fear. The truth was, he didn't know. No one knew. But he couldn't afford to give up hope, not now, not when they had a chance to survive. "I don't know," he said softly. "But we're alive. And that's something. As long as we're alive, there's always hope." They ate quietly, each of them lost in their thoughts. The world outside had changed beyond recognition, but for the first time in a while, they had something resembling safety. At least for now. The night passed in relative silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the cabin and the distant moans of the undead in the woods. The group huddled together in the dim light, knowing they couldn't afford to grow complacent. Tomorrow, they would face whatever came next, and they would face it together. For now, survival was all that mattered. Morning arrived with the faintest glow creeping through the cracks in the cabin's wooden walls. The previous night had been filled with tense silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the cabin's old frame and the distant growls of the undead. The group hadn't slept much, but they were alive, and that was something. The fire in the stove had long since gone cold, and now, as the day broke, the reality of their situation began to sink in once again. Mr. Carter woke to find the others still huddled in the dim light, their faces weary from lack of sleep. Sarah was curled up in the corner, her arms wrapped around her knees, her eyes red from crying. James and Michael were talking in hushed tones, though their conversation seemed more like an attempt to distract themselves than anything meaningful. Jack, the stranger they had reluctantly accepted into their group, was staring out the window, his expression unreadable. "Morning," Mr. Carter said quietly, though his voice was hoarse from the dry air inside the cabin. Jack turned his head slowly, nodding in response. "Morning. Looks like it's going to be another rough day." Mr. Carter stood, stretching out his stiff muscles. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, but he refused to let it break him. He had to be strong, for them. "We can't stay here forever," he said, his voice carrying the heavy truth. "We'll need to keep moving eventually. But right now, we need to figure out our next step. We can't just leave, can we?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. She was looking at him with wide, uncertain eyes. "What if they're still out there? What if we're walking straight into more of them?" Mr. Carter met her gaze, his expression serious. "We can't hide forever. We have to find other survivors. We have to keep going." James raised an eyebrow. "That sounds great, but where exactly are we supposed to go? We have no idea what's out there anymore." Jack, who had been quiet up until now, spoke up. "I've been out here for days. I've seen the destruction firsthand. The whole town's overrun. It's a ghost town now. The city center's crawling with them. Do you know of any safe zones?" Mr. Carter asked, his voice urgent. "A place where there are other survivors? Maybe some kind of camp or community?" Jack shook his head, looking down at the floor. "Not that I've seen. But I know of a place, a bit of a long shot, but it's a compound on the outskirts. Some people were trying to build a sanctuary there before the outbreak spread. I can take you there, but it's not guaranteed to be safe. I can't promise anything." Mr. Carter took a deep breath. The uncertainty in Jack's words weighed heavily on him. They had no choice. They couldn't stay in this cabin forever. They needed to find a bigger group. They needed to find hope. "We'll go there," Mr. Carter decided, his voice firm. "It's the best lead we've got." The group gathered what little supplies they had left, checking over their belongings and making sure everyone had what they needed. The sun had risen higher in the sky, and the warmth from the light outside gave the air a false sense of normalcy. But the world beyond the cabin was anything but normal. The streets were filled with danger, and the woods were no guarantee of safety. But they couldn't stay here. Not anymore. Jack led the way, guiding them out of the clearing and back into the woods. The terrain was rougher now, with dense underbrush making every step a challenge. The trees loomed overhead, casting long shadows across the ground, and the air felt thick, oppressive. As they walked, the tension between the group was palpable. There was no talking, no words to offer comfort. Each person was lost in their own thoughts, consumed by fear of what lay ahead. Sarah kept glancing nervously over her shoulder, as though expecting to see the undead closing in on them at any moment. James fidgeted with the strap of his backpack, his face tight with anxiety. Michael, however, was strangely quiet. He hadn't said much since the school, and now, with every step, his gaze seemed to become more distant, as though he was retreating into his own mind. Mr. Carter noticed this but said nothing. It was clear that everyone was dealing with the situation in their own way. After what felt like hours of walking, Jack finally stopped. "We're close," he said, his voice low. "The compound should be just over that ridge." Mr. Carter stepped forward, peering into the distance. The trees cleared for a moment, revealing a small hill. On the other side, he could make out the shape of what looked like a fence, a tall, reinforced fence. The compound. "Stay close," Mr. Carter warned. "And stay quiet." The group moved forward cautiously, keeping to the shadows of the trees. The closer they got to the compound, the more Mr. Carter's pulse quickened. What if it was Overrun? What if they walked right into a trap? The possibility of finding safety was growing, but so was the danger. The closer they got, the more exposed they became. When they finally reached the top of the ridge, Mr. Carter squinted through the trees. The compound came into full view now, and what he saw made his stomach twist. The fence was high and made of thick metal, topped with barbed wire, but the gate was wide open. That was a bad sign. There were no guards, no signs of activity. It looked abandoned. The walls of the compound were overgrown with weeds, and the area inside appeared eerily quiet. Not a single person moved. No sounds of life. "Is it safe?" Sarah whispered, her voice filled with doubt. Jack hesitated. "I don't know. I haven't been this close in a while." Mr. Carter's mind raced. The compound could be a sanctuary, or it could be a death trap. They couldn't afford to take chances. They needed answers. "We go in," Mr. Carter said. "But we stay alert. Don't trust anything you see until we're sure." They made their way cautiously toward the gate, their footsteps light and quick. Every creak of the branches underfoot felt deafening, every distant noise made their hearts race. They reached the compound entrance and peered inside, scanning for any movement, any signs of life, or death. The silence was deafening. The group stood at the entrance of the compound, their breath shallow as they surveyed the eerie emptiness before them. The gate was wide open, the metal frame creaking in the wind, but there was no sign of life, no movement, no sounds. The silence that surrounded the compound felt wrong. Every instinct screamed at them to turn back, but they had come this far, and they couldn't afford to retreat now. "Do you think it's abandoned?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It looks like it," Jack replied, his eyes scanning the surroundings with a mixture of caution and unease. "But we won't know for sure until we get inside." Mr. Carter stepped forward, his hand on the rough wood of the gate. It was rusted but sturdy, the faint smell of decay in the air. He pushed the gate open slowly, the squeal of the hinges making everyone flinch. The sound seemed to echo across the compound, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. "Stay close," Mr. Carter ordered, his voice firm but soft. "Don't let your guard down. We don't know what's waiting for us inside." They stepped through the gate, their footsteps muffled on the overgrown grass. The compound stretched out before them, once a place of safety, now a desolate shell. The buildings were squat, fortified with concrete walls, but the windows were shattered, and the fences surrounding the area were falling into disrepair. A few rusted vehicles sat in the parking lot, abandoned like the rest of the place. There were no signs of life, no people, no animals, nothing. The whole area felt like a ghost town. "I don't like this," James muttered under his breath, his eyes darting nervously from side to side. "It's too quiet. It's like the whole world just disappeared." Mr. Carter nodded, his gut tightening with a sense of dread. "I agree. Keep your eyes peeled. We're not in the clear yet." They made their way through the compound, the heavy silence hanging over them like a thick fog. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the air itself was pressing down on them. The only sound was the faint rustle of the wind through the overgrown weeds and the occasional creak of old metal. They approached one of the larger buildings, a structure that seemed to have once been a community center or a gathering place. The door was ajar, and they hesitated for a moment before entering. The interior was dark, the only light coming from the cracks in the boarded-up windows. It smelled musty, like mold and decay. The group stepped inside, the wooden floor creaking underfoot. Mr. Carter motioned for everyone to stay close as he led the way through the darkened hallway. Their footsteps echoed in the emptiness, and every creak of the floorboards seemed to reverberate like a warning. There were no signs of life inside, no people, no survivors, just the remnants of what had once been a thriving community. Papers scattered across the floor, empty cans of food, and discarded belongings littered the hall. But no people. Not a single soul. They reached a large open room at the end of the hall, and Mr. Carter paused. The room was filled with long tables and chairs, but it was the walls that caught his attention. Bloodstains marred the floor, and a few dark, brittle handprints were smeared across the walls. The unmistakable signs of a struggle. "Looks like this place didn't survive the outbreak," Jack said grimly, his voice low. "They fought until the end, but they didn't make it." Mr. Carter's stomach churned as he took in the scene. The bloodstains, the overturned chairs, it all pointed to one thing: the people here had been caught off guard, just like them. The thought of more survivors being slaughtered was a bitter pill to swallow, but it only fueled his determination. "We have to keep moving," Mr. Carter said, his voice steady, though the fear gnawing at him was palpable. "We don't know if there are more of them around here, and we can't risk staying in one place for too long." As they moved through the building, the sense of unease grew stronger. The atmosphere was thick with a feeling of abandonment, as though whatever had happened here had been sudden, leaving no time for proper evacuation. It was the same feeling they had experienced back at the school, everything abandoned in haste, leaving behind only the remnants of a world that had once been normal. They exited the building and continued to explore the compound, hoping to find some sign of life, some indication that they weren't the last ones left. But the more they searched, the more desolate the place became. The compound was completely silent, and every corner they turned revealed more empty buildings, abandoned vehicles, and decaying structures. Finally, they reached the center of the compound, where a large, fortified building stood. Its metal door was partially open, and Mr. Carter motioned for everyone to stop. He approached the door cautiously, placing his hand on the cold metal. "Jack, is this the building you were talking about?" Mr. Carter asked, his voice tense. Jack nodded slowly. "Yeah. This is it. But it doesn't look like anyone's been here for a long time." Mr. Carter took a deep breath. This was the place they had been hoping for, the place they had been walking toward. But now, with the silence pressing in from all sides and the eerie emptiness of the compound surrounding them, Mr. Carter wasn't sure what to think anymore. Could this truly be a sanctuary? Or had it been abandoned long ago, just like everything else? With one last look at the door, Mr. Carter pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick and stale, but as they stepped into the darkened interior, they could hear something. A faint noise, a soft shuffle, like footsteps or breathing. It was the first sound of life they had heard in hours. "Stay sharp," Mr. Carter whispered. "We don't know what's inside." As the group stepped forward, their eyes straining in the dim light, they couldn't help but wonder, was this the beginning of something new, or had they just walked into another trap? The answers awaited them on the other side of the door, and they would have to face whatever came next. The air in the darkened room was thick and musty, every breath feeling heavy as they stepped further inside. Mr. Carter's hand gripped the makeshift weapon tighter, his senses on high alert. The faint sound of shuffling echoed through the space, sending an icy shiver down his spine. It was coming from the far side of the room, slow, deliberate movement. They weren't alone. "Stay close," he whispered to the group, signaling for them to remain quiet as they crept forward, eyes darting to every shadow. The dim light from cracks in the walls barely illuminated the interior of the building, leaving much of it hidden in darkness. The faint shuffle grew louder, more distinct, like someone, or something, was moving toward them. Jack's eyes flickered nervously. "This is it. There might be survivors, but there's a chance it's not who we expect." Mr. Carter nodded, motioning for the others to remain quiet. Every inch of him screamed to turn back, to retreat into the unknown wilderness. But they had come this far. They had to know what lay ahead. As they approached the source of the sound, the silhouette of a figure emerged in the gloom. It was tall, hunched over, its movements jerky and uncoordinated. It was one of them, one of the undead. The terrible truth hit them in an instant: the building wasn't a sanctuary, it was a trap, a tomb for those who had failed to escape the horrors of the world. The group froze, watching in stunned silence as the creature, its clothes torn and stained with blood, slowly shuffled toward them. It groaned softly, its eyes vacant, lifeless. The stench of decay filled the room, and every instinct screamed at Mr. Carter to act. But there was no time to think. Without warning, the undead lunged forward, its arms outstretched. Jack reacted first, grabbing a nearby rusted pipe and swinging it with everything he had. The metal made a sickening thud as it struck the creature's skull, sending it crashing to the floor. "Move!" Mr. Carter shouted, his voice sharp, rallying the group into action. They weren't alone. The shuffle of more bodies in the darkness filled the air. One by one, more figures appeared, groaning, stumbling forward with a hunger that was undeniable. The room, which had once seemed like a safe haven, was now filled with the terrifying sounds of the undead closing in. "Back to the entrance," Mr. Carter ordered. "We need to fight our way out of here." Panic surged through the group as they turned and sprinted toward the door. The undead weren't far behind, their movements slow but relentless. Sarah stumbled, her legs giving way beneath her, but Michael grabbed her arm and helped her back to her feet. "We can't outrun them," James yelled, his voice tight with fear. "What do we do now?" "Stay together," Mr. Carter shouted, leading them back toward the gate. "We fight. We hold them off long enough to get out." Jack swung the pipe again, knocking another zombie to the ground as it lunged at him. It wasn't enough. More kept coming. The group was being overrun. Mr. Carter fought to stay calm, his mind racing as he scanned the area. They couldn't keep up this fight forever. They had to find a way out. The sound of footsteps echoed from behind them, and a figure appeared in the doorway. It was another survivor, a woman, ragged and weary, but alive. She held a shotgun in her hands, and the look in her eyes was one of determination. "Get back," she yelled, raising the weapon. With a loud bang, the blast echoed through the room, sending one of the zombies flying backward. The woman fired again, and another undead creature fell. The group didn't hesitate. Mr. Carter ushered them toward the doorway, his heart racing. The woman was their only hope. "Who are you?" he asked, trying to catch his breath. "My name's Claire," she replied, her eyes sharp. "I've been hiding here for weeks. I thought I was the last one." Mr. Carter's mind reeled. Another survivor. But there was no time for introductions. The undead were closing in fast, and they couldn't waste any more time. "Can you help us?" he asked, urgency in his voice. Claire nodded grimly. "I can get you out, but we need to move fast. Follow me." With Claire leading the way, the group rushed through the building, their hearts pounding with fear and hope. The hallway was filled with the stench of death, the walls lined with bloodstains, but Claire moved with practiced precision. She knew this place. They reached another door at the back of the compound, a metal exit leading out into the wild. Claire quickly unlatched it, and the group spilled out into the open air, the sounds of the undead still echoing in their ears. The open ground was a welcome sight, but it didn't offer them the safety they needed. The compound was surrounded, and the undead were closing in fast. But Claire had a plan. She led them toward a nearby barn, its door cracked open just enough for them to slip through unnoticed. Inside the barn, the group took a moment to catch their breath, their eyes wide with disbelief at the turn of events. Claire stood watch by the door, her face tense. "We're safe for now," she said quietly, her voice filled with exhaustion. "But it won't be long before they find us. The undead are everywhere." Mr. Carter looked around at the group, his mind still reeling from the chaos. But as he looked at each of them, Sarah, James, Michael, Jack, and even the stranger Claire, he realized they had made it through another battle. They had survived. "We keep moving," he said, his voice firm. "We survive. That's all we can do now." The world outside had crumbled, but as long as they were alive, there was still hope. They would find others. They would rebuild. For now, though, they had to rest. But even as they settled into the barn, Mr. Carter knew they couldn't afford to stay in one place for long. The world had changed, and so must they. But there was still a glimmer of hope, just a glimmer, if they could hold on long enough. And so, they waited, not knowing what the future would hold, but united in their resolve to survive.